In the name of love, you may be seated. Today we gather together, all saints, in person and online, with broken hearts, with fear and anger at unspeakable crimes currently being committed against humanity. Our minds and our senses are saturated with reports and images of brutality. These are circumstances over which we have little control, and we are left feeling helpless. As we mourn and seek understanding, it is important to be together, to remind ourselves that we are a people of hope who desire to live into the Christ consciousness of radical empathy. All saints, we are a community of intentional prayer and coordinated action. It is good to be together. The brutality we are witnessing is unspeakable, and yet we must speak. We condemn without qualification the violence committed by Hamas. We condemn without qualification the genocidal rhetoric and actions directed by the Israeli government, and the ethnic cleansing undergirded by a defense minister who calls other human beings animals. We do not need more destruction to determine that these actions are wrong. Acts of hate and annihilation are always wrong. Our community is drawn by the compassion of God to live and breathe out compassion for all people. To do this, we must widen our lens beyond the appalling present moment, not denying its horror, but refusing to let that horror represent all there is to know. We need to absorb the full story as much as we are able. Unfortunately, our media does not help. Israeli violence against Palestinians has been intentionally hidden steadily over time. It has not detailed the horrors that Palestinian people have lived through for decades in the forms of bombings, arbitrary attacks, arrests, and killings. All this has been taking place in physical conditions that have been described as an open-air prison, a place of both slow and sudden death. If the humanitarian disaster happening in this moment assumes a greater moral importance for our media than the last 70 years of racist subjugation of Palestinian people by the Israeli government, then we must speak out. Consider that more than 1,000 children, maybe up to 1,500 in Gaza, have been killed. Around 1/3 of Gaza homes have been destroyed or damaged in just 2 weeks. And this is before what is expected to be a much costlier ground invasion. It is estimated that 50,000 Palestinian women are pregnant, with 5,000 due to deliver their babies over the next several months. As we speak out against the violent subjugation of Palestinian people by the Israeli government, we must also hold compassion for the people of Israel who have also lived through millennia of hate and annihilation. We are called to hold great complexity and the fullest story we can of both our Jewish and Palestinian siblings and our country's own involvement. We need to be equipped to act and pray in a world that has seemingly little appetite for it. It takes a courageous way of learning to accompany immediate moral condemnation with moral vision. Can we mourn the lives lost in Israel as well as those lives in Gaza, without qualifications. This kind of consciousness is critical, not for the purposes of rationalizing existing violence or authorizing further violence, but to seek another path that neither perpetuates a xenophobic response nor sustains an unjust status quo. The polarization in our world and our country pulls us to take sides and narrow true dialogue, dehumanizing those whose views differ from our own, using whatever means necessary to push and dominate rather than collaborate. The rise in hate and hate crimes is not only in the Middle East, but our own backyard, and on occasion, on our own front lawn. Why do we hate? One reason is the fear of those who are different from us. When we feel threatened by perceived outsiders, we turn to those who are like us to feel safer. That is why God is almost obsessed with hospitality to the stranger and tells us to remember that we were or could be the stranger in a strange land. We are instructed not only to care for the poor and the othered, but to welcome and value the stranger who is rich in their difference from us. Difference is a gift to be received in trust of God's treasuring of our own unique and different selves. We can also hate because we project unwanted parts of ourselves onto others. We develop this method to survive because we think that any badness in us puts us at risk for being rejected and alone. It is a fear of our own selves and lack of compassion for ourselves that we see as coming from others. This is why Jesus tells us to love others, and as we love ourselves, and it is why we are so dependent on God's love for us in order to do it. Profound interdependence is something we all share. And the need for love lies at the very foundation of every human heart. Oh, what a better world it would be if we could compassionately embrace our common need and vulnerability. Now, some of us can hate because we have been hurt physically or devalued or had those we love who have been harmed. In these cases, revenge is often a part of hate. Behind revenge is a desire to hurt the person or group as much as we have been hurt by them. Hate spreads and increases more quickly when it's directed at a group rather than an individual. Without being confronted with specific persons or contrasting informations from a group, the intensity of hate can grow. Hate is based on stereotypes and prejudices. When people in conflict regions were asked to tell stories in which they hated someone, 80% talked about groups, not individuals. This is why proximity to each other and learning each other's stories is so vital. When we encounter one another, our preconceived ideas diminish and our empathy grows. Once you factor in human beings and refuse to capitulate to the idea that governments are the people, the complexity becomes even more vast and beautiful. God calls us to radical empathy, to actively engage and consider another person's point of view even when we strongly disagree, in order to connect more deeply. It involves striving to better understand and share feelings of others and then allowing our own perspectives to change. This week, I listened to a podcast of 3 interfaith leaders based in Chicago, a rabbi, an Islamic leader, and the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss, lead pastor of Trinity Methodist Church. This team led a group to Israel and Gaza seeking understanding and to learn better ways to engage in peace and justice making. This group's departure back to Chicago was the day of the Hamas attack. In the podcast, they each described the surreal moments driving to the airport, hearing the first news of the strikes. As they arrived in the terminal, the intensity of the attack became nearer and clearer, resulting in terror of all those inside. Everyone scrambled together, all in need of comfort and the help of each other. In those moments, people didn't care who belonged to what group. They held each other, carried each other's luggage, and assisted each other in finding their way. As in many moments of crisis, the common vulnerability, the common humanity, and the common need for comfort and connection shone above everything else. How do we hang on to our common humanity in the midst of polarities and dehumanization? Can we foster this connection in ourselves and each other? Our gospel reading today has an answer. We must ground ourselves in the deepest reality that exists, the never-ending love of God at the center of all creation. It is at the center of each of us and everyone else, no matter how hidden, distorted, and invisible to us it might seem. Sometimes we must use our empathic imagination and our faith to see it. When we cannot, we lean into God who never loses God's vision of anyone. In this gospel, Jesus is addressing the separated ones. In his time, these were religious leaders whose focus had become determining who was pure and worthy and who was not. All of us can mistakenly base our identities on the exclusion and devaluation of others. Our task must be to free ourselves from this unholy perception by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature. God's presence is everywhere, and it is God's presence we are to revere. This is why, responding to the questioners who were pushing him to divide things up on a level of importance, Jesus answers with wholeness. Jesus' radical compassion and egalitarian love was an invitation to the separated ones to join the kingdom party, where there is unity across diversity only and always. Jesus taught them and us 3 things: to love God, to love ourselves, and to love each other as we are loved. He knew that we can only love because we are first loved, truly secure in our identity as God's beloved. When we face the fear of being vulnerable and utterly human, it allows us to connect, to feel, and ultimately to love. All faith traditions know this truth. In order to make a difference in the world, we must dwell in compassion and absolutely refuse to reduce our complexity or give up on our goodness. We must dig deep, seeing across difference as we recognize the deepest desire of all human beings to live together in freedom, nonviolence, equality, and justice. We are a people of hope because nothing is impossible with God. This hope is not just something for dreamers and prophets, but also for those who know how to organize. After this service, we will have an opportunity, as we do each week, to put our faith into action by donating to Episcopal Relief for Al-Ali Hospital. We will also have the opportunity to sign letters to our state and federal government asking that our leaders do all that is in their power to de-escalate violence. They must call for an immediate ceasefire and an end to plans for an Israeli ground invasion. It would necessarily mean more loss of more civilian lives. Roll up your sleeves, All Saints. Join those in our community who will be traveling to Leo Beck Temple this evening to support our Jewish siblings in their time of trauma and need. Together, we must do the work of radical compassion until no child is born into disaster or subjected to horror. And as I close, and while you're on the lawn, please enjoy the hospitality offered to us by our Asian American Pacific Islander Ministry as we celebrate Filipino American History Month. Stay, learn, and listen to the stories you may have never known. It is good to be together today. Amen.